Hey folks, this is Abel James, and thanks so much for joining us on the Fat Burning Man Show, where we talk about real food and real results. If you're not feeling and performing at your best, how do you identify exactly what's out of whack? When you're suffering from fatigue, brain fog, anxiety, depression, weight gain, or disrupted sleep, tracking down the root cause can be nearly impossible on your own. And while the heavy-handed pharmaceutical approach can be useful for some conditions, a life sentence of taking drugs that just dull the symptoms doesn't save the rest of your body from falling apart. If you're looking for lifelong health and quality of life, a supportive approach that identifies and treats the root cause and shifts your body into a healing state is essential. So I'm pleased that joining us on the show today is Dr. Isabella Wentz, a New York Times bestselling author and integrative pharmacist dedicated to finding the root causes of chronic health conditions. Isabella's passion stems from her own diagnosis with Hashimoto's thyroiditis in 2009, following a decade of debilitating symptoms. So whether you've been at this for a while or you're just getting into this business of health nuttery, Dr. Wentz has some helpful tips on ways you can start cleaning up your own health. But before we get there, here's a quick note that came in from Shalina. She says, "Hi, Abel. I just listened to an old FBM episode and you mentioned your struggles with hypothyroidism in years past. What caught my attention was the correlation you made with your consistently low running body temperature. I've noticed the same about myself for the past few years, and I continue to struggle significantly with my weight despite healthy efforts. I typically range between 96.2 and 97.3-ish. Hardly do I ever see the 98.6 reading of normalcy," in air quotes there. "I have had my thyroid tested several times in years past by my doctor and everything checks out fine," air quotes once more. "Thyroid issues do run in my family, predominantly hypo, so I've suspected this to be an issue for a while. Do you have any insights on this? Tips for reversing any sluggish thyroid function if present? Obviously, I'd rather not take medication, and we are unfortunately without a functional medicine doctor in the area. Thanks, Shalina." Hey, Shalina, thank you so much for reaching out and for asking this question. It's a little bit tricky, and I am not qualified to give medical advice. And you mentioned that finding a functional medicine practitioner in your area is difficult, which I can understand. But thankfully, these days, many practitioners now work remotely, and I would highly recommend looking for one to work with that you can meet with from afar if there isn't a functional medicine practitioner in your area. This was many years ago, but anecdotally, I can say that being exposed to environmental toxins played a huge role in my thyroid and overall body working well or not. And I needed to clear up that issue and mostly get out of that toxic environment in order to start healing. This was actually when I was renting an apartment back at Dartmouth College that I originally got very, very ill and my body temperature started suffering. And that was due to unmitigated high levels of toxic black mold all throughout the apartment. It wasn't Dartmouth school apartments. It was actually just outside, still on campus, but it was like a private apartment. This person, the landlord at the time, was not taking care of these problems. I just needed to get out of there. So oftentimes it's actually environmental factors that can play a massive role in whether or not we're healing our bodies over time. So if you find that there is some sort of blind spot there, or you're in a less than perfect living situation in terms of environmental toxins, then it's really important to clean that up. But also I can say that getting rid of most processed foods, as well as gluten and some other dietary factors, seemed to accelerate the healing once I got out of those toxic environments. And hopefully today's interview with Dr. Isabella Wentz will also provide you with some insight, tools, and resources for improving your health, especially as it relates to the adrenals and the thyroid. But if you'd like to get in touch, ask a question, or share some feedback, I'd love to hear from you. The easiest way to do that is to sign up for our free newsletter over at fatburningman.com and just hit reply to any of the emails that I send your way. As an added bonus, when you join our newsletter, we'll send you a free 7-day wild meal plan and a wild quick start guide to help you get results as quickly as possible. You'll also be tuned in to all the behind the scenes and special developments around the future of health, and there's a lot of cool stuff coming your way. And if you have a quick second, just make sure that you're subscribed to the Fat Burning Man Show wherever you watch or listen to your podcasts. If you want to leave a quick review, that really helps as well, and we certainly appreciate it. All right, on to this show with Dr. Isabella Wentz. We're talking about how to restore balance in the body, especially for folks with Hashimoto's, thyroid issues, or autoimmune issues, how to adjust your diet to reduce inflammation, tips on optimizing your hormones, the best exercises when you're wired and tired, why you should be filtering your water. This one is so important and so easy to overlook as well. How to use adaptogens to balance the stress response, and a whole lot more. All right, let's go hang out with Dr. Wentz. Welcome back, folks. Joining us on the show today is Dr. Isabella Wentz, a New York Times best-selling author and an integrative pharmacist dedicated to finding the root causes of chronic health conditions. Her new book, Adrenal Transformation Protocol, includes a 4-week program that focuses on resetting the body's stress response. Thanks so much for being here with us, Dr. Wentz.
Thank you so much, Abel. It's so great to see you again.
Nice to see you too. And I think a lot of people out there will be very interested in what you have to say from a few different angles. But let's start with your backstory as a pharmacist who also was a patient or turning into a patient as you learned that world of allopathic medicine. And then we can shift gears and talk about some of your newer developments in your work, where who isn't stressed these days and whose adrenals don't need a little break. I'm not sure if anyone's out there who's like that, but let's start with how you got into this as a patient and as a practitioner.
Sure. So when I first was going through pharmacy school, I had like a t-shirt that said "I heart drugs," and I was really into pharmaceuticals and just super excited about what medications can do. And I wanted to invent a cure for a health condition, and just going through that process, I just was very passionate about appropriate medication use, and I still am. But what happened was that when I graduated from pharmacy school, and even during pharmacy school, I had some kind of weird things come up. And one of them was irritable bowel syndrome when I was in like my second year of my doctorate program. And things just, were like, I didn't even know what was going on. And I went to my doctor, they gave me a medication. This medication made me like blurry eyed and like have dry mouth. And I was like, this isn't working. And I ended up talking to a pharmacist that I worked with who provided me with some guidance and said, hey, those like Ensure shakes that you're drinking in the morning because, you're trying to get to graduate school and you're in a rush and you don't want to eat like a real breakfast. They have some junk in them. Like, have you considered actually cutting that out of your diet? And I was like, that sounds suspicious. I've never heard of that, but you know what? You're crazy, but I'm going to give it a chance. And then I realized that soy lecithin, which is added to a lot of processed foods, I was reacting to that, and my gut just did not like that. So anytime I had something with soy lecithin, I'd get like irritable bowel syndrome. And so that was kind of my first like foray into like, well, my super smart doctor tried to give me this medication and it just kind of made me feel worse. And the solution was actually like something in my processed food that wasn't working within my body. And I kind of always remembered that, but was still, very passionate about medications until I came to be a pharmacist, and some things just kept getting worse and worse. So the irritable bowel syndrome was kind of managed, but then I got acid reflux, and then I got carpal tunnel. I was losing hair. I started having like anxiety attacks, and I was always tired. And I thought to myself, like, okay, something's going on and something's out of balance. I had been working with people with some really rare health conditions. And I noticed that a lot of times, I say this as a joke, but not all doctors are created equally, right? So I knew that some of my patients were like not getting better. And sometimes it was like going to a different doctor, asking for a different set of labs and trying different things. And I ended up finding a doctor that diagnosed me with Hashimoto's. And this is an autoimmune condition that affects the thyroid gland. And I was like, okay, great. Medications, here I come. Yay, I finally get on medication. This is going to be like life-changing. Like all my problems are going to be gone. Not so much.
Not so.
Yeah, thyroid meds helped. They helped, like I slept maybe 11 hours instead of 12. So that was an improvement, sure. And I wasn't wearing 2 jackets in Southern California. I only needed one. So that was an improvement, but everything else was still a problem. So I still had carpal tunnel, acid reflux, digestive issues, still had the fatigue, and still had the hair loss. And just, I was in my 20s. I was like, I'm falling apart. What the heck is happening to me? And that's how I stumbled onto functional medicine and nutrition and utilizing supplements and figuring out what the root cause is to heal my own self. And I've just had, just a complete re-education over the last 15 years of what it means to be healthy and what it means to get somebody healthy. And medications can definitely play a role in that, but we can't expect them to do everything. And in many cases, if we utilize lifestyle, we may not need medications at all. And so that's how I became kind of a functional medicine expert slash human guinea pig, just my own health, right?
And I mean, drugs are kind of cool. As a pharmacist, you get to see that heavy-handed approach can be very, very useful for some conditions in some particular ways for some people at some times. But if you're looking for lifelong health, and quality of life, then those more supportive approaches that you've embraced in the years following that experience can be much more useful to people. And so when something like the thyroid starts faltering, it's hard to know exactly what's happening. And like you said, your body starts falling apart, especially for people who are a little bit younger in their 20s. And I experienced this as well with my thyroid when I was younger. It wasn't working quite right, and my friends seemed healthier than I was and happier. And I'm putting on weight and not really knowing what exactly is going on. Now, there are a lot of things that you can do to make it better, but unfortunately, this is a problem that's becoming more and more common. That maybe you could share some of the numbers for people these days who are having some sort of issue with their thyroid. It's kind of skyrocketing, right?
Yeah, it's crazy because people think that, Hashimoto's, this is a rare condition and, this sounds super, super exotic, but it's super common, especially in women. I'll look at different statistics and research studies out there, and I'll find stats like 1 in 5 women will be affected at some point in their lifetime. And then when you look at the level of thyroid antibodies, which indicate Hashimoto's and maybe not yet like overt thyroid dysfunction, but the beginning stages of it where you're going to be symptomatic, um, we're looking at 20 to 30% of the population maybe walking around
Wow.
Hashimoto's antibodies. And then another part of that is not everybody who has Hashimoto's has antibodies, right? So some people may not produce the thyroid antibodies, but they still might have inflammation or an autoimmune attack against their thyroid glands. And then we have the people that their thyroid gland slows things down and they're producing too much of thyroid hormone blocker, which is known as reverse T3, just because they're super stressed out. And so this is a huge, huge thing happening to, I would say, a lot of people. Like I would say maybe if I were to be like super conservative, I would say probably 20% of the population.
Yeesh. But at the same time, most people are not really discriminating or being as discriminating as we are with their nutrition, especially as you are, because the things that you can kick out that might develop into having autoimmune issues down the road are the most common foods, unfortunately, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, what I found in my work and what was super game changing for me. So I started on the medications and I was like, I feel a little bit better. And then I wanted to know if there was anything else I can do. And I came across some research with a gluten free diet helping people with Hashimoto's and celiac disease. Some people were able to completely normalize their thyroid. No more thyroid antibodies, no need for thyroid hormone replacement, just by cutting out gluten. And I was like, okay, this is hard. I'm a Polish girl. We eat pierogi. We eat like
Yeah.
bread and all kinds of things, right? So, but I was like, I'm going to give it a try. I'm just going to see what happens. I'll give it 2 weeks. I also cut out dairy at the same time because I found a test and it said that I was sensitive to it. I was like, this isn't going to work. This is never going to work. But you know what? I'm going to try it just so I could say that it's not going to work, right? And lo and behold, like 3 days later, I'm like, wait a minute, what happened to like the acid reflux? I've had this for 3 years. Like, where did it go? And I was like, my stomach, why is my stomach so flat? Where did these abs come from? Like, I had been going to like Pilates and working out, but I always had like this belly. And I was like, wait a minute, like I have abs? How did that happen? And then my carpal tunnel went away. And I was like, huh, these like crazy people that talk about nutrition and like food issues and food sensitivities, like maybe I'm the crazy one for not believing in that. And so gluten, dairy, and soy are just three problematic foods for many people with Hashimoto's. I would say most of them.
Yeah, and if you're eating out, those three things are in almost everything, whether it's a fancy place or not. So you need to be careful, right? If you are doing that experiment for yourself and saying, I want to kick these things out, then all of a sudden you need to plan ahead. So what were some of the things that you did to make sure that you were focusing on what you could eat when a lot of the most popular foods were all of a sudden kicked out for this little experiment of kicking out gluten and that sort of thing?
It was tricky at first for sure because I used to eat out a lot and I used to love going to just different fancy restaurants and trying like whatever, right? Being very adventurous. And so that part was really, really tricky. But I initially hunkered down on just preparing my own food and focusing on how to shop, right? So what foods should I be eating? Initially, I made the rookie mistake of like just getting a bunch of junk food, right? So I was like, this is gluten free cookies.
It's
That's
easy, yeah.
breakfast, right?
Yeah.
um, but eventually it was like, if you eat whole, real foods, like you're going to be able to eat gluten free and dairy free. If you shop the perimeter, so eating things like meat and eating things like nuts and seeds, if you're not sensitive to them, eating like vegetables and fruit, eating real food was just like really transformative. And holy cow, like I feel so much better. I don't feel anxious anymore. I have like really good digestion. I didn't know that like your stomach wasn't supposed to hurt after you ate food. Like I thought like everybody's stomach hurt after they ate. Like I thought it was just a thing. And so the strategies were just really focusing on like buying a bunch of cookbooks. I bought a bunch of paleo cookbooks. I love that you guys share recipes and just going through and figuring out like, okay, what's the plan? And figuring out meal plans for the next few weeks. Cause I know there's like if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And I really had to take a bit of time just to get myself ready. So such a good question because people are like, I'm going to do it. And then it's like a day later, it's like, oh crap, I'm at work and everybody's eating bagels, right? What am I going to do?
Yeah. Were there any go-to meals that you started with, or you're just like, I'm going to nail a handful of these and make sure that I have them around, or have a big cook day and then they're in the fridge so I can pull them out when I need them? How did that look for you?
I used to do eggs for breakfast, and that was always a really easy go to. And I did a lot of batch cooking on the weekends. So I would spend like my Sunday mornings. I'd like wake up, I'd go to Whole Foods or Trader Joe's and pick out the foods that I was going to have, and then just spend a few hours batch cooking them on Sunday. I did something called jar salads. Have you done those before?
Oh yeah, it's a great idea.
Yeah, I loved it. I would just like fill up like four of them for the week and have my veggies, have like different kind of cut up veggies in them and salad and greens and some blueberries, some olives. And then I'd have like a separate container where I would have like boiled eggs or chicken, some sort of a protein that I could just kind of like pick up and put a jar in my backpack and then have the protein ready and just have like a half a lemon and some olive oil and then just kind of like mix it up on the day of at work because I had like a 30-minute lunch at work which made things tricky, right? To try to go out to a restaurant and then come back. Like I used to back in the day I used to just eat Subway, right? Because like you just have so little time from your work break as a pharmacist to like go out and get food and you're like pretty much, eating it on the drive back to your job, right? So I needed very quick for especially that middle of the day meal and the jar salads were it. And then for dinner it was usually just like a protein and some veggies and maybe I used to do a bit of rice or potatoes or something that gave me a little bit of starch in the evening so I could sleep a little bit better.
Yeah. So so it was one of those things where you really did have to plan. You had to get in the kitchen and you had to go shopping, right? You didn't skip those steps and just try to eat out and make this work.
Yeah, I think it's easier to eat out these days. I know you and I both live
Yeah, it's gotten better.
and Boulder. It was like I would be offended if I would walk into a restaurant and they didn't have at least like 25 gluten-free options. Like there's some
Right.
parts of the US where it's just like, yeah, it's super, super easy, but not everywhere. So a lot of times just really healing starts with yourself and cooking for yourself and taking care of yourself. I know these days there's like delivery options and a bunch more options that are available to us. So I'm grateful for those too.
What about when you hear that this gluten-free stuff, it's still just a fad. It's always been a fad. People are making it up. They don't really need to stop eating gluten. Whole grains are the healthiest for us. Like, what's your response to that now?
I mean, I just like kind of wonder. It actually kind of made me realize like how much more out there. Like we just assume these things are true and we believe them, and then we kind of override our own body's signals, right? Now,
Yeah.
that's just it. Just kind of it was a big awakening for me when I just realized that like actually like I can listen to my own body, and this is what my body tells me. Now we're looking at working with people over the last decade. 88% of them feel better gluten free, 80% of them feel better dairy free. And then there's like just so much research behind all the different ways that people can react to gluten. So whether that's from if you have celiac disease, that's really well established, really well known. Then there are people that might react because they have SIBO, which about 50% of people with Hashimoto's do. And so maybe that might be like a temporary thing. Then there's like cross reactivity between the thyroid gland and between gluten proteins. And so then we have an issue where if we're eating it and we have like this immune dysregulation, then we're going to be attacking the gluten. We're going to be attacking the thyroid whenever we eat gluten. And there's just, I feel like people that say that they're just uneducated at this point. And I don't mean to be just, I'm not going to call them like an idiot or a dummy or be disrespectful, but I just might say like, hey, if you don't believe that, I would say check in with your own body. And by the way, here's here's some research and here's some evidence. I know different people, we have like the early adapters and innovators and people that are like, yeah, this is it. And then there's also some people that like kind of lag behind. And I'm like that with like phones. Like I had my flip phone until like 5 years ago, and then my brother and my husband had an intervention. That's okay. Um,
I still have a headphone jack. It's all right.
I love it. Yeah, there you go.
What about dairy? Because there's sheep cheese, there's goat milk, there's A2 milk, then there's just general conventional milk and dairy that most people are having, and processed cheeses. There's kind of this spectrum. So how do you think about dairy? Is it binary where you just say no, all dairy is not allowed because this is an autoimmune issue that we're treating? Or is it just like, oh, if something is in it a little bit at the restaurant, then it's not that big of a deal, or it's going to ruin me? Like, what does that look like for you?
Okay, that's such a great question. I think it depends on the person, and my answer has evolved over the last 10 years as I've learned more and have seen more people. Initially, I used to think like there's just a bunch of these foods and they're problematic and they're inflammatory. Everybody needs to stop eating them, and dairy was in that category. I would say about 80% of people with Hashimoto's feel better dairy free, and most people, if you're at the beginning of your journey and if you're having a lot of inflammation in the body, I would say like fully commit to being dairy free for at least 30 to 60 days and see what happens. Because I have had some people that like ghee is great, right? So that is like a good good source of fat, and it's organic and so on and so forth. But if you're super inflamed and reacting to a lot of things, dairy is going to be one of the harder proteins for you to break down. You might have even like fat sensitivity or fatty transport issues, which can make things like butter and ghee problematic for you. People are like, oh, lactose. And I'm like, I'm not super worried about lactose for most people. It's actually the proteins. And for some people, it's fatty transport. So the early stages, yes, please, commit 100%, go dairy free. Then when you kind of go through this process and your body has healed, then you can start reintroducing it. Would I reintroduce conventional dairy first? Probably not. I would go with something like goat's milk, goat's cheese, some of the less like the organic things, some of the less inflammatory things. What I have found is that dairy sensitivity can go away. And there may be certain cofactors that can be helpful with reversing dairy sensitivity. And I learned that on accident when I was like a newly breastfeeding mom. I actually took some
Hmm.
lactation supplements and like my lifelong dairy sensitivity just like vanished, right? And
No
so
kidding.
potassium is actually the key. So utilizing some electrolytes. I used alfalfa, but unless you want to like produce breast milk, you should probably not take that supplement. But
Yeah.
electrolytes kind of do the same thing for you, as well as carnitine. So carnitine can be helpful for clearing out dairy sensitivity. And that is something, might not happen overnight, but I definitely recommend starting off with an elimination diet, and then you can start incorporating some of these additional nutrients that you may be missing that can act as cofactors for your digestive process, and you'll be able to tolerate more foods. My goal is never to like be like you can only eat ice cubes, right? My goal is like
Right.
let's support your body so it can thrive.
At the same time, though, if we look around at the foods that are around us, or even the ones that might be paleo or primal friendly or something that you just like, it's very easy for some of these food groups to just grow into a larger and larger portion of daily calories. And for me, that can be dairy over the course of my life, especially on road trips or whatever. Oh, let's get some nice cheese. That'll be fun. And let's, you know, get some Greek yogurt as well, or some kefir or something like that. And then all of a sudden, it balloons into this bigger and bigger portion of your daily calories. And so I think a lot of people, even if they have been, pretty strict paleo in the past, but that maybe they've reintroduced some of these foods. It's not something that you just do at one point in your life and then you're done and you can reintroduce it and you're totally fine and healthy for the rest of your life. It's more like the body needs to go through these cycles of making sure that it can process all the things you're throwing at it. And just because these things are available at the grocery store doesn't mean that we should be eating them in those quantities, even if they check the boxes for your nutritional approach, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The people do get in trouble when they eat like too much of a certain food group, right? And so whether that's something like almonds, I know when I first started um like just getting into nutrition, I was like, "Oh, almonds, like I could make bread out of almonds, right? I could make muffins." I was like, "There's 6 almond muffins a day, right?" And then I was like, "Why is my skin breaking out? And, what's going on? Like why am I having issues with like going to the bathroom all the time?" And so almonds can be, like great replacement for occasional like bread, but you shouldn't be like, I'm going to eat almonds all the time. They are high in oxalates. I have found that some people do have issues with skin breakouts, with mood swings when they eat too many almonds and nuts in general. They can have too many inflammatory oils in them. So it's kind of a nuance. Like I know when people are starting and they're new to changing their diet, they're like, okay, and I'm so guilty of it. It's like, okay, gluten free.
Yeah,
So
we all are.
yeah, let me just eat this box of cereal because it's gluten free, right? It's good for me.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and saying, "Well, almonds are good for me. They fit in my dietary plan, so might as well have a handful of almonds, have another handful because I'm still hungry. Then for a treat that night, let's have some cookies that were made entirely with super concentrated almond flour." It's a slippery slope when you start confining what you're eating. So that's why I'm curious, and I think it's super helpful for people when they do kind of eliminate, not that dairy is a food group, but if you're trying to get rid of nuts, seeds, dairy, gluten all at the same time, you're like, yes, I want to do this. I want to do this. And then you show up that day and you're like, oh, geez, I don't know what to eat. I'm at work and I am out of food. I don't have any ideas. So back to that point earlier, having those big cook days, big shopping days, and it has gotten easier. Curbside pickup, other people can shop for you for a few bucks or whatever. It's not an excuse, but it is just to re-emphasize that it does take some planning, and it's totally worth it. And you can feel the positive effects of following these changes, but only if you do them pretty consistently over the course of a few weeks. It doesn't happen all the first day, correct?
It's super interesting, but generally I'll start seeing trends within 3 days in people where they'll say, "Oh my God,
Wow.
I got off of this food and I feel better." That's actually kind of been my experience. Is usually it's like 3 to 5 days for something to start working, but the full effects you might need 3 to 4 weeks where you're like, "Oh wow, like this has really made a big difference." So I love, like all of the commitments. It's like just take 30 days, and and focus on 30 days to try it and see what happens. Like, don't give up after like one day, like, right?
Yeah. Well, and it can be tricky too because there are other factors. Like I've heard you speak about iodine, and it's one of those things where having way too little or way too much becomes a huge problem. It's that perfect balance that you always need. So maybe you can talk about that a little.
Yeah, a lot of times people get diagnosed with a thyroid condition and they might go to the health food store or perhaps read an article online that talks about how thyroid issues are caused by low iodine. Now, this isn't entirely false. So, back in the day when we had iodine deficiency, that was the primary reason of hypothyroidism worldwide. That's changed since United States and other countries have started adding iodine to the salt supply. So I'll see people going on and they'll be like, "Oh, seaweed snacks, that's a rich source of iodine. Let me take some iodine drops." And they're like, "Okay, let's get my thyroid to work better." And unfortunately, then they feel worse. So I've had clients that have come to me and they were like, I was a little bit hypothyroid and I had a little bit of thyroid antibodies. Then my TSH jumped to 100. My thyroid antibodies jumped into the 2000 plus range. And I was like bedridden for a few weeks. And it all started with me just like wanting to add more iodine. Now, the thing is, iodine is like a Goldilocks nutrient. And when we get too much of it, the research has shown that it can actually cause an increase in thyroid antibodies and thyroid hormone destruction. It's like the body, yes, it's used to make thyroid hormones, but in Hashimoto's, it's not like the body can't make thyroid hormones. It's just that the immune system has recognized the thyroid gland as a foreign invader. And one of the things that makes the immune system really excited to attack the thyroid gland is when it's loaded with iodine. Then the immune system is like, okay, we need to attack that like extra, right? And so unfortunately, this happens, and it's a misconception for really well meaning people talk about like, oh, you just need to wake up your thyroid, right? It's like, no, no, no. You can actually like you need to lay low. Let your thyroid lay low. Let's calm down the immune system first, and then we can kind of get it to work better and optimize it. But we need to like cool that inflammation. Otherwise, just if your thyroid is like visible, then it's going to get attacked.
Yeah, so it's not one of those we need a heavy-handed approach type deal where you're just blasting the thyroid with all this iodine to try to wake it up. That's not the approach to take here. I have heard a lot of people talk about it that way, though.
I think there's definitely certain instances, like let's say the thyroid gland is under attack, but because you have an infection in the thyroid gland that's sensitive to iodine. So iodine in very high doses can be antimicrobial. And then you'll have people that are like, worked for me, right? But like 9 out of 10 times I'll see it actually doesn't work that way. So maybe the infection isn't like in the thyroid gland, maybe the infection is in the gut, or maybe it's a food that they're eating. Maybe they have breast implants that have led to an immune dysregulation. Maybe they have mold exposure. So there's just a whole host of different triggers and root causes that are going to cause the immune system to be out of balance, that are going to lead the thyroid gland to be under attack. And I wish it was that simple. Like everybody could just take iodine, right? And everything would be great. But unfortunately, it gets a bit tricky. And for most people, like I just find the amount that's like in a prenatal or a multivitamin, like 150 micrograms to 300 micrograms is what works. But when we're getting into like the seaweed snacks or like the super concentrated iodine, that can be an issue.
Yeah, some of them are insanely concentrated. I had no idea until I really looked at it, and I'm like, wow, this is a far cry from eating anything from food, or even processed salt. The amount that you're getting in there can be shocking. But let's switch gears a little bit. I've heard you talk about the importance of drinking good, high quality water that doesn't have a bunch of extraneous stuff in it or chemicals or fluoride. So, why is that important on a daily basis to make sure that our water is particularly clean and have that on our radar?
Sure. So there's various types of halogens, and they can displace iodine and take up residence in our thyroid gland. There's just the thyroid gland is sensitive to a lot of things, and it's kind of like our sensor. It's a little canary in the coal mine. And when we have halogens in our water, so chlorine or fluoride are two particular ones, they can get into the thyroid gland and cause some inflammation. I think it's really been interesting that back in the day, fluoride was used to suppress thyroid function when somebody had an overactive thyroid. And if you're drinking fluoridated water, depending on what community you're living in, and you're drinking your 6 to 8 um, cups of water a day, like you could be getting enough to suppress your thyroid function, right? And so, just to be on the safe side, I generally recommend filtering your water and then adding things like minerals and micronutrients back in, because we can be like, and it's not just even like those things. There's like certain communities that might have like giardia, or they might have like pathogens inside of the water supply. So it's like, I remember there was an article about something just within the last 10, 15 years, in like the some water supply in Los Angeles was contaminated with like protozoa. And I'm like, you'd think that in modern times this wouldn't be an issue, but it still is. It still can happen.
It still is. We have traveled and lived in so many places over the past decade and change, and it's been on our radar for a long time. But getting clean water is one of the biggest challenges that we've had, because even if you're looking up, trying to look up what is in that water, and if it's been disclosed or not, if there are contaminants, oftentimes it has been disclosed and then covered up, and you can't find it anymore. That for instance, the water in X area is super high in lead. We've found this in multiple states. We've done some of our own tests in the past, and we've also tested our own bodies and have been high in certain things, despite the fact that we do filter our water as much as we can, and have for many years. But it's something that for some reason, especially the people who are just getting into this health nuttery business, and trying to clean up their health for the first time, they're like, oh yeah, I'll do the diet first and I'll think about water eventually. And I don't really have to think about it yet. But it's something that the sooner you can clean that up and get a good quality source, you'll start feeling better almost immediately, and at least getting rid of some of the biggest impediments to your feeling better.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's just so many different contaminants. Another one is like copper that can be present in certain pipes, and that could lead to copper toxicity, and that can make somebody feel crazy. It can cause them to have anxiety, insomnia, and so on and so forth. And just a matter of filtering your water can be helpful for that.
Yeah. And we've run into that too. I remember copper pipes in one of the houses. It was so bad that I lost my cookies after drinking some water after a run, because you could taste it at this particular house. I'm like, oh, just one glass of water probably won't matter that much, but it does. It's worth paying extra attention to this sort of thing. And there are also consequences for the brain as related to not just water and all that, but the thyroid and how that's functioning, and the downstream consequences of not addressing these issues. So maybe we can talk about that next.
So yeah, the one of the key roles of the thyroid gland is to manage our metabolism throughout the body. And so typically people will think like, okay, if you have hypothyroidism, then you're probably going to gain extra weight. And I think that's motivating enough for a lot of people, but not everybody gains weight when they have thyroid issues. Some people actually feel it more in their brains. And so they will have brain fog and fatigue, and they feel like they're like, I've had people tell me like, my head feels like it's disconnected from my body. I feel like a neat freak that is stuck inside of like a really lazy person's body. And then like can become disassociated. They can have anxiety. They can have depression. I've seen people being misdiagnosed with like bipolar disorder when they have, sometimes they have Hashimoto's, and then that just ends up, our brain cells just don't function the way that we're supposed to. Our, you know, our brains just don't connect so well, and we get very forgetful. We walk into rooms, we forget why, we forget simple words, and it can be quite scary for a lot of people. And this is one of the key ways that the thyroid gland can impact our brain function. And there's luckily there's a lot of things we can do to make it better.
And with so many people experiencing anxiety, depression, brain fog, hard time getting out of bed, it can be hard to figure out exactly what's going on with your body, because a lot of different issues can manifest that way for people. But Once again, that heavy-handed pharmaceutical approach of just saying, "Oh, well, you have depression, so take this," when the root cause is more related to what's going on in your thyroid or environmental toxins or what's going on in your diet. It can be very important to not try to just paste over the symptoms in your life with these pharmaceuticals, because then you're kind of signing yourself up for a life sentence of taking those pharmaceuticals and also just treating the symptoms while other things, slowly or quickly fall apart on you.
Absolutely. And like the pharmaceuticals, they can be very specific for a certain type of receptor. So let's say your hypothyroidism caused you not to produce enough serotonin, and that makes you more anxious. And there's a lot of theories of why we become anxious and depressed. Serotonin is just one of them. And so the conventional approach is to give you a drug that helps your serotonin stick around longer. And so that might be helpful for one thing, but there are other things, other ways that the thyroid dysfunction can manifest in the body. So for women, it can cause fertility issues, right? And so they can have multiple miscarriages. If you're taking an antidepressant, maybe you're not anxious and depressed anymore. Maybe that's helped you somewhat. But if you haven't corrected that hypothyroidism and the reason why you became hypothyroid, then you're still going to be having multiple issues with fertility, or perhaps you're just not going to be digesting things really well because hypothyroidism can still slow down your digestive process. So I really like to focus in on like what is out of balance in the body and how do we restore that balance. And a lot of times it has to do with lifestyle. Sometimes it's hormone optimization, right? At a certain stage where you've had this thing going on for a while and your thyroid gland has been damaged, where it's just, it can't spit out that much thyroid hormone. You may need to bring on some thyroid hormone and some bioidentical thyroid hormone versus just the straight up pharmaceutical one that may or may not convert to the bioactive thyroid hormone. And then there may be other things you need to do to repair the consequences of having hypothyroidism, like your digestion, and to repair the reasons why you may have gotten a thyroid issue in the first place, which may be dysregulated stress response or toxic exposure or some gut infection. Among other things.
Speaking of stress, yeah, how does adrenal function play into all of this?
So adrenal function and being a skeptical pharmacist, I was like, started on my journey. I was like, okay, did this food thing that was really, really helpful, but I was still kind of tired and still having some anxiety issues and just not as sharp as I used to be. I was always like super nerdy, super sharp, super quick. And I was still like, I'm having brain fog. I'm not as funny as I used to be. People tell jokes and it takes me like 5 minutes to like laugh at them, right? And so I was like, what else can I do? And somebody mentioned adrenal fatigue to me. I looked it up, I Googled it, and I'm like, it doesn't exist. According to like the medical
Yeah.
science,
Yeah,
right?
that's what you'll find. It doesn't exist.
It just does not exist. But I'm like, but wait, I have all these symptoms that don't exist, and my symptoms exist, and this thing doesn't exist. So I'm like, okay, let me just give it a try, because apparently gluten sensitivity didn't exist, but somehow it right? Um, so I tried the recommendations for adrenal fatigue, adrenal dysfunction. I was like, huh, I'm not tired in the mornings. I can get out of bed. I have more energy. I'm not as anxious. And through, I always started off with my own journey, but I've worked with over 1,000 people with Hashimoto's over the years and helping them recover their health, and have done a lot of functional lab testing with them. And most of them have some degree of adrenal dysfunction where essentially their stress response is off. So the brain and our adrenal glands communicate. And whenever we sense stress, we are supposed to release more cortisol to help us get through that stressful event. We hear that cortisol is bad, but like we need some amounts of it to help us get through day to day. And we need extra to get through a super stressful event. Now, when people are exposed to chronic stress, they end up with initially they might have too much cortisol on board. But once they go on in that state, the body's eventually going to try to bring things back into equilibrium. And it'll say like, hey, listen, I know you're stressed, but we can't have all this cortisol on board right now. So we need to shift things up. And then people actually end up with an imbalanced cortisol pattern where they might have too much of it at night, so they can't sleep. they don't have enough of it in the morning. So they don't have that like nice, kick in the butt to wake up and get out of bed like they're supposed to. And, or they might not have any at all when this is what I see in my clients with like chronic fatigue syndrome and autoimmunity, where they're just like tired the whole entire day and they could sleep 12 hours, but they're still tired. And so 90% of people with thyroid issues have some degree of adrenal dysfunction. And part of getting a person better when they have a thyroid issue is actually supporting the adrenals. Just giving them thyroid hormone will actually cause them to clear out more cortisol out of their body and can actually worsen some of the adrenal symptoms.
So, what is stress? Exactly. We all know that we should be reducing it, but also stress can be useful sometimes. And what is the way to turn it down, turn it up? How do you think about it, especially as adrenal health is concerned?
Yeah, and so it's like the tip of the iceberg. Like what people think stress is, right? Is like right at the tip. What stress actually is the whole iceberg underneath. And people typically think that stress is like, oh my gosh, I got in a fight with my husband and now I'm having a bad day. That was stressful. Or I drove in traffic to work. That was stressful, right? Something like to that effect where yes, that can absolutely be relevant. I had one review on my first book that said I didn't have to do anything she said. I just quit my toxic job and like told my boss to like go to hell and like my all my things gone away, right? So
That's an amazing review. I would take that as a huge compliment, but I don't know if that's exactly how you wanted your book to be taken.
like you're not wrong. If you could identify the source of the stress and get rid of it, then amazing, like good for you. But stress can be a lot of things. So stress could be current stress, like psychological stress. It could be history of past trauma, right? So stuff you may not even remember that happened when you were like 3 years old can root into your nervous system and can cause you to like overreact to certain things and underreact to other things and just make you like a walking around triggered person that like your just stress hormones are going to be all over the place. Your body's not going to be able to shift into a healing state. And you're going to be constantly breaking yourself down. So that's another layer of it. And then there are things like lifestyle factors. Sleep deprivation is one of the fastest ways to get into stress. Now, I had like self-induced sleep deprivation when I was in college. I was like, woohoo, parties, so much fun. Uh, but even if you're not like a 20-year-old party girl, like things like sleep apnea can cause you to have sleep issues. You may not be aware of it, right? Scalloped tongue might be a sign of it. Then you might have things like um, exposure to toxins or inflammation in the body. Like a big hidden source of it might be like a gut infection and you may not know it, but you have like this H. pylori or you have a protozoal parasite that's causing inflammation in the body, your body's going to pick that up as stress, right? And so that is going to be another big time stressor or inflammation from the foods that you're eating. So there's a lot of things that we might be aware of that are on the surface, and then there's all of these things happening underneath, like exposure to mold or breast implant illness or just eating foods that are not working within your body. These can all be different stressors that are shifting your body into like fight or flight rather than being in a rest, heal, and digest state and having that balance, right?
How do you add in those hormetic stressors like exercise and know that it's in the right balance to encourage good sleep instead of making you wired and tired and add to that burden of stress that you're already dealing with?
That's such a good question. And it like depends on where somebody is on their stress journey. So let's say you are like feeling like a person with high cortisol. They're going to be like impatient. Everybody around them is an idiot, right? Like doesn't know what they're talking about. Like they're talking fast. They can't sleep at night. Using like aerobic exercise, perhaps in the evening or whatever time you feel like you're super like, you've got that like crazy mind, that monkey mind going on and, not able to stop. Using something like that may be really, really helpful for you to clear out some of that cortisol. If I have a person that's like chronically fatigued, and they can barely get out of bed in the morning, and they can like just they sloth their way through their day, like I'm probably not going to be like marathon training is what you need right now, right? So that kind of person, the type of exercise they need to focus on is going to be gentle exercise like yoga that's going to help them reduce stress and shift them into the parasympathetic state. And then doing things that are more anabolic in nature. So, like lifting weights, maybe not like, 100 pounds to start with, but just doing little weights that you can lift just to kind of shift your body into like, hey, we're building ourselves up rather than doing like the amazing like catabolic exercise like biking or running or marathons. And even some of the people I've worked with, it's like even like walking like at a speed that's too high may be too hard for them initially. So my kind of goal is you should feel more energized after the type of exercise that you're doing. And you should only do so much where once you stop, you should be able to say like, oh, I could do that again, right? If you're trying to fill your adrenals. Of course, if your goal is to like finish a marathon in under 3 hours, that then we're talking about something different. But just gradually building up that exercise.
What about lifestyle factors like being a new parent, for example, where you know that you should sleep and have good sleep or whatever, and maybe you're doing the other things right, but because of having a small child around, it's very, very difficult to get that full night of sleep. How can you adjust your own lifestyle to still try to be as healthy as you possibly can in the face of some of these challenges?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and I was very humbled because I used to just tell people to like sleep, like you can't sleep,
Yeah.
sleep. And you have a child, well, that's the problem. Get a nanny. But it's like, you actually do need to like spend time with your children and take care of them and like be a parent. Like you can't like outsource them. And of course, not having children, I always was like, oh, people make it so hard. It's so easy. But definitely sleep deprivation is one of the fastest ways to get into adrenal dysfunction and to burn yourself out. And sleeping, if you can, is going to be a really great way to get out of it. Now, if you can't do that, and if you can't take hormones, and if you can't like quit coffee and just like, live in a monastery and meditate all day, right? There are other safety signals you can send to your body to shift it into more of a healing state. So for what I look at, and I have a tired mommy protocol. We look at what are the things that get burned out when you're sleep deprived, right? And there's actually a key few nutrients that we can utilize to support the brain in its recovery process. And fish oils. So fish oils are going to get depleted when we're not sleeping enough. Choline. There's utilizing choline can be very, very helpful for repairing your brain after sleep deprivation. Thiamine, this is another thing that gets depleted when we're not sleeping well. So doing these things can be really, really helpful, as well as utilizing rhodiola and then other types of adaptogens, depending if you're breastfeeding or not. Rhodiola and Tulsi holy basil are generally going to be safe for breastfeeding moms, but utilizing them can help us become more resilient to the sleep deprivation. And then there's things like, grandparents, of course, and getting lots of bright lights
Yeah.
throughout the day just to really set yourself up so that when you do sleep, you dive deeper into like your restorative sleep and your REM sleep. So your sleep becomes more efficient. The other thing I might recommend, depending on how the baby might react, or if it's an older child, might be something like glycine and B6 in smaller amounts, because too much can suppress lactation. But doing something like that helps you make the most of the sleep that you are getting. So glycine help us just feel more refreshed, even if we didn't get a full night's sleep. So there are definitely things we can do, and it's all about like, okay, you are burning yourself out because of sleep deprivation, and so let's replace some of the things that get burned out to help fuel your body in the process of it.
I love that. And some other supplements I've heard you talk about before, magnesium can be very useful, making sure that you have your electrolytes in good balance as well. Zinc, what are some other ones that people should be paying attention to?
Well, the kind of the fundamental things I really talk about is like the ABCs of adrenal dysfunction. So adaptogens are going to be really, really helpful in balancing the stress response. I always say like people will take adaptogens and they'll say like everybody around them has just become nicer. This person used to be a jerk. This person used to be a jerk, but like I take adaptogens now, and all of a sudden they're like they're just better people, right? And it makes us more resilient to stress. So that's just fabulous. B vitamins, we burn through them when we're under stress. P5P is a really important one, as well as the thiamine that I mentioned is really helpful for a lot of people, as well as vitamin B5. But really, folate. A lot of these things get like burned. So I oftentimes recommend just doing like a B complex and sometimes mega dosing on other things if needed. And then vitamin C is a super big one that people will oftentimes burn through when they're under stress, and they end up becoming sick, right? And they're like, I'm so burned out, now I'm sick. And getting that vitamin C on board helps to balance our immune system, balances our stress response. And then magnesium, like you said, is another important one that we burn through. And something really simple like electrolytes, right? Just adding electrolytes to our system is going to be incredibly helpful for achieving that balance.
Right on. I can't believe this has gone by so quickly, but what is the best place to find your work, Dr. Wentz, as well as your new book?
Sure. My website is thyroidpharmacist.com. I have the ABCs of adrenals at thyroidpharmacist.com/ABC. And then I have a new book called The Adrenal Transformation Protocol. And it's a plan for releasing stress symptoms and going from surviving to thriving in 4 weeks, just utilizing, tuning into our body's stress response and sending the body safety signals to shift it from that like overwhelm and really survival mode into like a thriving mode. And it really does take 3 to 4 weeks if you know how to send your body the targeted safety signals.
And we probably all need that book right now, if we're going to be honest with ourselves. So thank you so much for focusing your work around adrenals, stress, thyroid, a lot of issues that people are probably encountering in their lives, in their own lives or around them without even realizing it, because a lot of these things are just kind of brushed under the rug and not talked about or not fully understood. So thank you so much for focusing your work in the way that you do and putting your books out there and continuing to work hard while also keeping your stress in check. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's definitely like a test, like to do a book launch. And then like also I'm like, okay, let me reread this part of my book. Am I getting my magnesium today? Did I do my electrolytes right?
Yeah, at least you have a deep bag of tricks and lots of alternative strategies for dealing with life's challenges as they come up. But Dr. Wentz, once again, thank you so much for joining us here today. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Abel one last time, and I just want to say thank you for listening to this episode of Fat Burning Man. Before you go, please smash that like button, hit subscribe, or even leave us a quick review. It helps so much more than you even realize. And if you can think of someone else who you care about, friend, family member, anyone else who might appreciate this free show, then please take a quick second just to share it with them. Word of mouth is really the way that we've grown this show over the years. We have more than, at this point, 4 awards in independent media, 50 million downloads. We couldn't do any of this without you, so we really appreciate it. If you'd like to get in touch with me, then please follow me under Abel James or Fat Burning Man on your social media platform of choice, and I'll do my best to get right back to you. Now, if you want to keep this show coming to you, you can do something really quickly here. My wife Allison and I, along with a very small team, depend on listeners like you to make this show happen week after week. To join our next challenge coaching group or get in touch with me one-on-one, visit fatburningman.com. We also make group coaching free with your subscribe and save orders from our family company, Wild Superfoods, which you can find at wildsuperfoods.com. And if you'd like, you can throw a few bucks into the tip jar as a one-time donation or become a contributing member of our group on Patreon. Just look up Abel James on Patreon and you can join in the fun for as little as a few bucks and get my international best-selling book and audiobook as a special thanks. You can also find that page at fatburningman.com/tipjar. Now, a quick disclaimer for all those legal eagles out there. The Fat Burning Man Show provides general information and discussions about health and related subjects. The information provided in this show or in any related materials are not intended and should not be construed as medical advice, nor is the information a substitute for professional medical expertise, diagnosis, or treatment. The opinions and views expressed on this show have no relation to those of any academic, hospital, health practice, or other institution, including corporate overlords. We don't have any of those. If you or any other person has a medical concern, I wholeheartedly encourage you to consult with your healthcare provider. Whew, okay. Don't forget to join our newsletter over at fatburningman.com. When you sign up for our email, I'll even send you a wild quick start guide along with a few of our ridiculously tasty recipes, even Allison's famous chocolate cookies, as a special thanks for signing up. This is Abel James signing off. Thank you so much for listening and have a great week.